Competencies are known as knowledge, skills, and attributes, KSA, not the musician, but knowledge, skills, and attitude required to do a job to acceptable performance. Welcome to HR Insight, where I simplify human resource concept. Today, I'm going to be looking at how to develop a competency framework. What is a competency framework? According to CIPD, a competency framework is a structure that sets out and defines each individual competence required by individuals working in an organization or part of an organization. The competency framework actually captures the competencies. The competencies are broken down into knowledge. That is talking about the knowledge required to do the role. What level of educational knowledge or type of knowledge that is required to do the role. Then we look at the skills required to do the role. Then we look at the attributes or behaviors. Now, these critical factors in terms of knowledge, skills, and attributes are known as competencies. Now, these competencies are required for acceptable job performance. The process of gathering the knowledge, skills, and attributes required for acceptable job performance for each job within an organization is you creating the competency framework itself. And each of these competencies will need to be interpreted in terms of proficiency levels. Proficiency levels such as basic, intermediate, and advanced. For me to apply or to use, for me to be able to use a particular machinery, I'm expected to operate at different levels of proficiency. In spoken English, for example, there are different levels of proficiency. All of that will need to be captured in your competency framework in terms of the knowledge, the skills, and the attributes required for acceptable job performance. Then all of that needs to be captured in terms of proficiency levels to form your competency framework. The competency framework for any organization is a critical tool that is useful for different parts of human resources. Competency framework are useful in recruitment. When you have been able to define the competency required to do a particular role, at the point of recruitment, you can have what we call a competency-based recruitment, competency-based interviews, competency-based assessment center that is aimed to check for specific competencies in the role. These competencies are captured as knowledge required to do the role, the skills required to do the job, the attributes required to do for acceptable performance, and the proficiency levels are very critical at the point of the recruitment. So if you need somebody to operate at spoken English or written communication at an advanced level, and the candidate is operating at basic, that means the candidate is not up to par with what you require. Similarly, competency framework is useful for career management and also talent management. So if I need to move from an officer level to a manager level, what are the competency required to operate at an officer in that job? What is the competency required to operate at a manager level? And when there is a gap in each of these competency, it tends to form a competency gap. That competency gap can be worked on by means of a training, which means you are now training a competency-based training, which means you are working on the competency required to do that role. And that is in terms of knowledge, skills, and attributes for the role. Part of a competency framework. Now, when you've captured all the knowledge required for the role, the skills required for the role, the attributes required for the role, for it to be able to be in a structural form, you need to group those competencies. And some of the headlines that are usually frequent in a competency framework, or what is usually captured in your competency dictionaries, talking about your core competence. So if you group the core competence is very similar to what we call organizational competence, similar to the core values of the organization. What are those things required to operate across the entire organization? They call them core competence. Then some competency categories is also your leadership competence. decision making in the role, planning and organizing. Those are examples of competence. We call them competency categories or clusters, as the case may be, that is captured on the dictionary. Then you could also have functional competence. Functional competence are competence that cut across different jobs within the organization. And your functional competence is one that is generic but are cut across all the jobs within the organization. Then you have your technical competence. The technical competence required to operate as an accountant is not the same technical competence required to operate as an HR officer, or the technical competence to operate as a electrical engineer or a mechanical engineer. Those are getting very specific. Now, in putting your competency framework together, it's critical for you to know how many competencies do we want to track in each of these competency clusters or competency categories. How many core competencies are we tracking? How many leadership competencies are we tracking? How many functional competencies are we tracking? How many technical competence or functional competence are we actually tracking? The less amount you're tracking, the more it is easier for you. In order for you to be able to gather the competencies required for the role, in terms of the competencies you call core competence, leadership competence, functional and technical competence, you need to do a detailed job analysis. From a job analysis exercise, it helps you to be able to unearth the knowledge, skills, and the attributes required to do the role, because that is very critical, because that will form part of your competency framework. Then when you've been able to gather for each of the competence, you need to categorize them on the various competency clusters. Now, I must point out here that the competency framework for organization A will not be the same as that of organization B. Yes, there are a few competency dictionaries that are available online, but the organization needs to decide the ones that will be applicable to their own organization. Then the levels of proficiency will differ. An organization can say we want to adopt a 3-level proficiency level. Another organization says they want to adopt a 4-level proficiency level. Another organization says they want to do a 5-level proficiency level. That is where the specificity will now start to come in from one organization to another. This is a typical example of just picking one particular competence to illustrate what you would typically have in your competency dictionary. So your competency dictionary will typically have the competence, then the definition of that competence, then the proficiency levels in terms of basic, intermediate, and advanced, and the demonstration of each of those proficiency levels. So someone that has planning and organizing as a competence means planning and organizing is defined as defining tasks and milestones to achieve objective. What's the basic level of demonstration? You are planning your own work. At intermediate level, you are planning for your team, and at advanced level, you are planning for the business. So that's giving you a typical example of planning and organization as a competency frame, as a competence. If I pick professionalism, that's another example. Professionalism, you define what's the basic demonstration in terms of proficiency level, what's the intermediate and the advanced level. All of this will be captured in your competency dictionary. By the time you go through each of these definitions and proficiency levels, then you'll be able to capture everything. You'll be able to capture all of this in your competency dictionary that forms part of your competency framework. I want to believe today's episode has been beneficial. If it has been, kindly click on the like button so that more people can have access to this episode. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next episode.